everyone. Welcome to our Metaverse panel, How to Decipher Hype from Brand Opportunity. I'm really excited to welcome three industry experts to sit down with me today to chat about this. Jonathan, Sarah, and Chris, welcome. Excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Would you maybe like to tell the audience who you are and what you do? Let's start with you, Jonathan.
Hi. Jonathan Stringfield. I oversee global business marketing, measurement research, and insights at Activision Blizzard across our media and esports practices. So essentially, I work with a global team ranging from marketers to researchers and data scientists to go out to market and talk to advertisers and interested entities about the power of gaming and gamers.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let's go to you next, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Stringer. I am the EVP Head of US Media Partnerships at Dentsu International out of the US. My role is really to work with the largest platform partners that we have to identify really interesting new and emerging work streams for our clients to be able to lean into. Gaming has been a really core focus of mine over the last probably decade, but I'm really glad to see that we have finally launched our Dentsu gaming offering as of the end of September this year globally. So we have been taking a lot of clients through the impact of gaming and where we think it's going. So it's a very exciting time.
Thanks, Sarah. And last but not least, Chris.
Hi, Zoe. My name is Chris Barbour, Director of Business Development and Partnerships for Augmented Reality at Reality Labs from Meta. And it's a pleasure to be here. My team is focused on working with creators, businesses, and brands to introduce new use cases for augmented reality and to bring them to people across the Meta family of apps and devices.
Great, thanks, Chris. First time using that name in public. Possibly.
I hope I got it right. It sure is.
Well, let's get to it. Lots to cover today, and maybe let's just start with level setting on what we're talking about here today, because Metaverse is being used, it's becoming such a buzzword, and it's describing everything from a fully interoperable, Ready Player One, alternative digital reality to just simply the physical and digital worlds blending. So maybe, I don't know, Sarah, do you want to start us off? What comes to mind when you hear Metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, the Metaverse is interesting because I think it's it's going to be a representation of how we want to interact with a fully digitized world. We will have goods, services, your identity, and so forth can be different and uncoupled potentially from how you show up in the regular world, which is really interesting. What I think is a debate at the moment that we're having around Metaverse as people talk about how do brands get involved and what does it mean around large platform partners and so forth, is how we think of it as part of Web 3.0. So if we think of, the way that we're going to be showing up in 3D, how we can interact with each other and so forth, that is sort of one layer to the Metaverse. The second layer is kind of this idea of Web 3.0, which is decentralized, the idea of you being a sovereign of your own identity, of your own data, and how the Metaverse will help unlock potentially brand new businesses and ways that people can, I guess, go about the digital world, but also have more autonomy as to how they share their information, themselves, the experiences that they opt into and so forth. So it's a very interesting time. And I think no one's going to get it perfectly right at this stage because we're in such early stages of working out how this is going to work.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I love that idea of the sovereign Web 3.0. Jonathan, anything to add to that definition? Like, how are you?
I mean, I think agreed with a lot of what Sarah said, particularly early days, right? So I think the biggest level set is that there's, quite a bit of excitement, quite a bit of enthusiasm behind it. And I think that's good and healthy because candidly, this will be an important series of ideas, and candidly, the more folks that are contributing to it, the better. But for that reason, when, I kind of think about what does it mean? Where are we going with it? I still kind of like hinge on this concept of spatial presence. And the idea is that, yes, that could be inclusive of things like, virtual embodiment in a virtual environment, or simply things that are just increasing immersion, right? So one way or another, we're talking about a little bit more rather less distance between kind of like digital and physical selves. And there's a lot of ways that could manifest, right? So I think thinking about that through the lens of, how it could happen over the next 5, 10, to potentially 15 years, because we're looking more at like a step change rather than, tomorrow we're going to wake up and be like, cool, everyone's in the metaverse. Like that's not really, how things are going to work out in practice. And then I would also agree with the Web 3.0, point that Sarah made, that I think these things are often linked, and probably they will be in dialogue, but they're also important enough, and at this point early enough and complex enough that let's think about them as, these kind of their concepts on their own, whether you're talking about the concept of decentralization versus spatial presence or embodiment of virtual selves. They will likely interlink, I think, and I think it's also healthy to think about where that nexus could be, but there's still enough at this point that we're kind of setting the foundation, and right now just kind of exploring these ideas in and of themselves and seeing where we can extract value from them is what's going to be super important.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Yes, I totally agree with the whole, it's not black and white, we're sort of looking at a continuum. And Chris, obviously everyone's probably keen to hear your answer with the Facebook Meta name change last week. What's your kind of definition of the metaverse? Is it fluid? Is it quite defined? How are you seeing it?
Sure. Well, as you noted, Zoe, last week we held Meta Connect, which is our opportunity to introduce Meta as a company, as well as our visions for the metaverse. And I think at a high level, the way that we think about it is as an embodied internet. A set of virtual spaces and real world spaces and experiences that one can traverse between, create and explore and go between as an identity. And I think that kind of connective tissue between experiences is a really important aspect of the metaverse. A lot of the conversation now around the metaverse is about the experiences and the content that the metaverse will enable. And I like to think about it, again, analogous to the mobile web or the internet that we know so well. The internet, with the internet, the infrastructure, if you will, was built largely before the experiences. There weren't, thousands and millions of websites before the internet as a concept came into fruition. There were some experiences for sure. I think what's happening now with this journey towards the metaverse is that both are happening at the same time. There is this evolution of the infrastructure, and Jonathan and Sarah spoke a little bit about some of that. But at the same time, there are also experiences that are currently available to people, many of them in virtual reality and some of them in 2D. And I think what we're living through now is what I'll describe as kind of this convergence towards the infrastructure and the experiences coming together into this, unified embodied internet.
That's a great point about how the experiences are sort of preceding the infrastructure now. Well, let's stay with you for now, given that the whole point of this panel is to help brands differentiate hype from opportunity. What is some of the hype that you think brands should be ignoring, or some of the noise that they can cut out when it comes to the metaverse? Chris?
Sure. Well, as my friends have noted, there's a lot of conversation out there, and brands are actively trying to define their strategies for the metaverse. What I would encourage businesses and brands to do is take a step back and think about the practical applications of the relevant technologies today. I mentioned operating on 2D surfaces. Well, at Meta, we're enabling a lot of experiences that will be entry points, if you will, into the metaverse on 2D today. So I work on augmented reality, and we've enabled a number of augmented reality experiences in 2D across the Meta family of applications that we think are natural bridges into experiences that frankly collapse space and time and enable people to be present with one another across great distance, or enable people to be present with objects across great distance, or visit a time before in history, or take a journey into an imagined time in the future. All of those things will be possible through entry points from the real world as well as 2D experiences. So I think dispelling that the metaverse is something that I need to start building something entirely new to be a part of is a little misguided. There are things that you're already doing today that are your natural entry point into the metaverse.
Thanks, Chris. And Jonathan, I'm going to come to you next because I know you share a similar view when it comes to gaming and the metaverse. Would you mind sharing some of your views?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I agree with a lot of what Chris said, but with a slightly different angles. You might suspect that, I'd be remiss and probably not doing my job if I didn't point out that gaming has long been one of these kind of natural entry points. And, if we think about how individuals interact in networked virtual environments, right, which we can kind of take as a baseline here, that's been the domain of gaming for some 50 years. Right now, in the early days, it was a bunch of text on a screen, but nonetheless, it was individuals that were interacting together. The only differentiation was that instead of having some technological barrier through which they were kind of having the world ported to them, it kind of came through their mind's eye. So that's why, again, I like to focus on that concept of spatial presence or immersion is kind of like that first thing we want to take off. Because again, to Chris's point, like there will be and has been and currently are experiences on a flat screen that can evoke that same feeling that very well are kind of representative of what the metaverse exists now. And again, much of it does point to some of the massive platforms that are available in gaming, whether they're sandbox or otherwise. And I think that gets to another thing that particular for brands should, kind of keep in mind that one, opportunities exist, right? There are definite places to learn how virtual interactions happen. And again, gaming is an entry point, other entry points exist. And that also that while, experimentation, cutting edge and what have you, like love that. We always want to experiment with that and kind of like see what that cutting edge is. We will get to a point where it's like, okay, let's figure out like what disproportionate value are we bringing to folks that, again, whatever we're bringing in some complex 3D environment or through some other, rather esoteric method through which that we're interacting with something that is that any better than what we can do on a flat screen, right? Which my point isn't to be like reductive or kind of have our thinking move forward. That's more of a prompt for us to kind of think better about it. That's like, okay, why would someone want to do this aside from the fact that it's just kind of cool in 3D? Because we're going to get to a point where we just have to be better than that in terms of making sure that this is meaningful for consumers.
And that's a great point because all of these concepts exist in gaming, they're just in 2D. All the emotions they evoke, gaming is increasingly becoming the place that Gen Z congregate online.
All in love there, gotten married, have adventures, killed dragons, like there's a lot they're doing there. Again, those are all different ways that folks are finding value that they can't find elsewhere. And again, that too is something important to keep in mind and why gaming is particularly provocative because again, you can do things there you can't do otherwise. So like that needs to be kind of like one of the metrics that we look at in terms of success.
Right. And Sarah, I know you mentioned that Dentsu just launched globally Dentsu Gaming. So obviously the brands that you work with are open to all of this and seeing this opportunity. How are you seeing the hype versus the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to audience at the end of the day. And I think, there's probably been a sense in the industry for a while that gamers have still been, it's not to say that they aren't young and we aren't seeing like obviously huge growth and interest in like Gen Z in gaming. But, during 2020, some of the fastest growing areas that we saw of people coming, like lapsed gamers coming back in, were actually older audiences. So 45 to 64-year-olds coming back into gaming during the pandemic. So we have to break down this sense that, only if you're maybe going to speak to a youth audience should you be looking at gaming. And I think, if you look at the industry and where there's growth, that I think a lot of clients have come on board because esports started eating into things that they thought that, was sort of safe to them, which was advertising in sports. But what they massively overlook at is the idea that mobile gaming, for instance, is enormous and is the largest way that you can tap into a gaming audience. Yet even a lot of people who play mobile gaming, and in some cases, 5 hours a week or more, so it's pretty significant game time with, they don't even consider themselves gamers. So I think we have to break down some barriers with clients around what they define a gamer as. And I do think that then when they're going into these environments, they need to be cognizant of the fact that this is a highly engaged audience. They are very in the moment, like that is your dominant screen, regardless of whatever game that you're playing. Because you can't really just like take a beat in a game, like you may die, you may lose out on like something. So, you really have to be attentive while you're there. And it does mean that the way that we advertise or brands need to show up needs to be complementary and add something to that experience versus being interruptive or be the reason that the game is paused or stopped or what have you. So we've been speaking to clients about understanding like what is beneficial to someone in that moment and how could you as a brand facilitate that. And I think that particularly as we start talking about metaverse, we need to start having conversations with clients around, if you know what your logo identity looks like, and if even now we're talking about what does your audio identity look like if you don't necessarily have a screen in front of you. We're now still starting to talk to brands about, what does your 3D identity look like? What is then that experience that happens when you show up as a brand in an environment where someone can choose to interact with you? So, it is very interesting because we are essentially inventing what hopefully good advertising looks like in the metaverse versus, taking old methodologies that have worked as like forced views and us trying to then transport that same level of annoyance that I think sometimes the advertising community can get slapped with into an environment where it is open world. People can choose to spend time with you or not. And if you don't give them that choice, it's only going to lead to really bad brand recognition. So I think really exciting conversations, not only for media planners, but also for creative agencies. And I do think you'll start to see more game developers starting to come into the mix in that creative conversation as we start to work out what is that right narrative for brands in a spatial environment.
Right. I mean, I think just to recap everything everyone said, start now. There's things you can do today in the 2D environment that sort of replicate that metaverse. There's metaverse concepts. It's the same kind of consumer behavior. Be authentic to the gaming space. Don't slap on ads that are not going to feel germane to that audience, and sort of have a reason for why you're providing it rather than for the novelty. Like, is this going to serve the consumer? Is that kind of sum up the hype that you guys would avoid as brands?
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think some brands that I think, I love that we're seeing like luxury fashion brands dabble and really like lead the way, I think, in a lot of these new like ad spaces. Is it potentially the right audience in some of the titles they've chosen? That's questionable, but at the end of the day, at least they're trying, at least they're working out what is relevant. They are getting that first mover advantage, and they're getting the data and the learnings as to how they can show up and create virtual events and virtual objects and so forth. So, I do think a bit of experimentation goes a long way.
And I tend to agree with Sarah on that, particularly for verticals and industries where there's kind of that natural extension, right? Like if we are talking about the concept of virtual advertisers or spaces or what have you, well, fashion, high-end fashion, that tends to translate rather well, right? And it's one of these things where, again, if you look at just kind of like baseline psychology in gaming, or you can kind of go down to like, particularly in a competitive environment of any type, folks like to do two things. They like to win, and they like to look better than the other people while they're winning. So if there's a mechanism through which brands can tap into that, and that's a natural win, right? So I think like, even though folks are like, oh, why is fashion getting into this? It's because that's kind of a natural extension. And I think there needs to be some thinking through other industries in terms of like what that could be. And it might not be that easy, and that there might be a little bit of a, steeper hill to climb, but nonetheless, I think thinking through what you offer, again, that could bring value, how could that potentially fit into these types of environments? And again, the need states of folks that are in there.
I really like the way you've kind of framed that up. It's almost like I'm seeing a Venn diagram of need states, environment, and value, right? Like, how do those all intersect, and where is your sweet spot? And you've kind of segued us nicely, Jonathan, into the opportunity. It sounds like these real world environments, they're so immersive, and the emotional connection and the neuropsychology behind being immersed and multisensory really does lend an opportunity to trigger some deep psychological connections with consumers. So you mentioned the value of status and distinction. I think when you were just talking, what other opportunities are we kind of seeing in this move towards the spatial internet? Anything else to add to that, Jonathan, before I kind of go to the other?
I mean, again, I think that nexus of what feels natural, how's it well integrated, and the value you bring is again, I think probably the right one to think through. And I think it's going to be natural that we're going to take some things that kind of work for us right now and plop it in these environments. And some of it's going to work and some of it isn't, right? But I think importantly, we need to be flexible enough to know that what we've worked or what has worked in the past, right, probably won't or may not, right? Or there might be some degree of alterations that's needed or what have you. Because again, the upside of something like an embodied internet, whatever you want to call it, is that, again, we are hinging on, okay, deeper emotional connection, deeper personal connection. That's great. However, it also comes across as the potentiality to be exploitative, or the potentiality to, in other words, like really disrupt a potential experience that is a little bit deeper than, say, going through a web page. So being more mindful, again, of the value and the mindset of the folks that are there. And again, there are plenty of opportunities now to kind of learn through and start to figure that out, as Sarah noted. That's what's going to be the winning advantage, because I think the potentiality for faux pas are pretty high, given that, this is a double-edged blade, right? Like the opportunity is huge in terms of that attention, that emotional connection, what have you, but that can also go the wrong way if we're doing something that kind of runs afoul of folks' sensibilities.
Breaks that illusion of being in another world.
Yeah. Breaking immersion is not a good thing. It's not good in gaming. It's probably not going to be good in a metaverse.
I'd agree. Chris, any thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts here on the opportunity. So, look, at a high level, we believe that the metaverse will be the biggest opportunity for modern business since the creation of the internet. Whether it's, as Sarah noted, thinking about how your brand and your business shows up in these new environments and comes to life in these new environments, and all of the opportunities to bring what you do in the physical world into these new environments, there are going to be countless ways that brands and businesses can show up and build new types of meaningful connections with consumers. Again, I referenced earlier some of the opportunities with augmented reality today, things like virtual try-ons and virtual shopping. Well, imagine recreating your Instagram or Facebook shop in a truly immersive environment, and or having the opportunity to go back and forth between the physical and the digital. I personally think this is a tremendous opportunity for the metaverse. We talk a lot about the digital or the virtual experiences we'll be having in the metaverse, but I think it's also important to ground that the metaverse is everywhere. It's not limited to any device or any screen. It is truly all around us. And this relationship between the virtual and the digital and the physical is going to be, I think, really powerful. You can think about things like trends that influence the physical world but are happening in virtual worlds and things like that. The other thing I would note that I think is a particularly exciting opportunity for brands and businesses is to begin to tap into or to participate in this brand new creator economy that's building up around the metaverse. I mean, you take a step back and you think about the internet. A few years back, who would have thought that so many people would be making a living off of the internet? I mean, it was truly unfathomable that there would be as many jobs and as many opportunities for economic advancement as there are generated by the internet. The same thing will be true of the metaverse, and it's beginning now. There are entirely new types of creator communities, 3D designers, augmented reality creators, gaming developers, et cetera, who are advancing their industries towards this new opportunity. I'm proud to share, at Facebook, we announced, Meta, last week we announced the Meta Immersive Learning Fund, which is a $150 million investment over 3 years towards exactly this, the creation, adoption, access, and understanding of new learning experiences. We truly want to enable the learning necessary for people to find economic opportunity in these new environments. And this is also an opportunity for brands to support that growing creator economy.
I mean, talk about different types of supply chain problems, right? Like if every brand is going to need to create all their product catalogs in 3D assets, and there are only so many creators who can do that. I mean, I think the opportunity now is for brands to start really building those relationships and making sure that they're set up for success.
Absolutely.
Sarah, I want to come to you now because, given everything we've talked about, this has to have huge implications for our industry. The way brands are going to interact with consumers, the way consumers are going to interact with other consumers. Web 2.0, it was really more of a passive experience where clicks and views and impressions really ruled the world. And now it's participatory, it's interactive, UGC is the king of the day. What are some of the implications that you are seeing for our industry and how we need to be thinking about value? Because I know Dentsu recently announced an attention metric. So clearly you guys are thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean, we've launched just now our phase 2 of our attention economy research. So phase 1 really looked at sort of like TV metrics, and sometimes that, you know, people would spend a lot of time assuming that TV was obviously delivering everything, but poor old digital would be judged in a much harsher fashion. So we're like, how do we actually work out if someone's present in the room, what the impact audio is, even if someone isn't necessarily directly in front of your TV, but is in the room. Phase 2, we then started looking at social video, the different formats within social to really identify, and these are all through eye tracking data, exactly, you know, how people are interacting with social formats and where we can optimize the impact that brands were having there. We think that gaming is such an interesting topic for us to be tackling then with our next phase of attention. So we're currently working with partners to identify a work stream around attention, understanding that, you know, eyes on screen is so impactful in gaming. As I mentioned, like if you really like take a minute away from your screen, something is going to have happened that will affect your gameplay. And, you know, the fact is that it's been tough, I think, for brands to think of gaming in their sort of like media mix. And what we want to do is try and create a point of translation so they can say, okay, what is the impact that gaming is having in conjunction to your social, in conjunction to your TV buying as well. So we think this is going to be a real game changer for how brands can really start to qualify exactly what gaming is contributing. And we think that attention is just a really great metric for us overall to kind of move away from this idea of reach and frequency as really the key way that we measure success of media. So we're really excited about it, and we think that you know, attention moving forward will be something that we hope will become an industry-wide metric. And I think that for gaming, it's just so perfect for what we need to achieve. And I know that Jonathan's particularly excited about that as well. We've been chatting about this, so it's cool.
And I'm a big advocate for everything related to attention economy, you know, and again, we've been using reach and frequency as the primary arbiter for advertiser value since 1960s, 1970s. And again, there's value to it, but I think we're quickly getting to a world where we finally need to kind of rethink how this works, because again, strictly speaking, if we keep trying to bolt on the same assumptions and the same metrics of the past to something that is now not just a little different, radically different from the ways that individuals interacted with and interfaced with media, it's just not going to work. So I think there too, taking those steps, understanding those opportunities now, starting to normalize that concept of kind of thinking outside the box of reach and frequency, which I know I just sent a shudder down the spine of every media planner on the planet. It's going to be necessary.
And you're right. I mean, we're in the AR group, we're talking about, do we need a play metric? Because engagement is just, it's one term that is used to describe so many different types of interactions and consumer behaviors. And with gaming, we have the unbreakable attention. Chris, I'm sure you have thoughts to chime in on here, or other ways that the metaverse is going to impact our industry.
Sure, I love everything that my friends are sharing, and Zoe, as you noted, I participate in the AR committee with you, and one of the things we've talked quite a bit about, of course, are the opportunities across the funnel for brands with new and emerging technologies. Again, particularly with augmented reality, we see activity that brands are having at the very top of the funnel, creating awareness and buzz about campaigns and new products, all the way down to the bottom of the funnel and driving real world conversions. Number of our augmented reality shopping partners are seeing truly important and meaningful metrics coming out of their work with bringing a virtual try-on experiences to the shopping and checkout experience. Consideration, we're seeing that folks who are able to experience a virtual or 3D product on the path towards conversion really enables them to have a better experience with that product and ultimately reduces returns. So there's a lot of opportunity for brands to advance their objectives and measure those objectives throughout the entire funnel that we're seeing in these emerging experiences.
And just to tack on to that, we're actually released during BDS right now, an AR creative showcase that is a collection of brand case studies showing how AR campaigns have driven results across the funnel. And the guide is actually organized according to the marketing funnel and how it's being used at each point. So hopefully we can drop that into the chat or follow up with that later. So keep an eye out for that. Great. So rounding out, let's leave the audience with some news they can use or something they can take away. What advice would each of you give to brands who are maybe watching this or reading about the metaverse and thinking, how do I get from my current media plan of clicks and impressions and views to this, not sure what it is, but know it's going to be big metaverse strategy? Jonathan, let's start with you.
Yeah, let me wax a little like a wet blanket, and then I'll go hopeful. So despite all of the headlines, like the metaverse isn't here yet, breathe. What we're looking at is a set of ideas and concepts, right? And again, each one of these ideas and concepts are things that can be explored, should be explored for how well they fit with a given brand, kind of sort of on an individual basis, but understand that many of them interconnect. And I think where we are now, and again, I think Chris raised a good point in terms of the infrastructure of what the metaverse can be with the business or the brand opportunities are kind of being built in tandem. So you kind of have the advantage of, again, looking at portals like gaming or AR or what have you as those first steps to get your intel up for interacting with what a more full, embodied, spatial present reliant universe could be. So I think paying more attention and focusing on those opportunities, understanding that, again, the metaverse is just a collection of ideas that may coalesce, but again, probably 5 or 10 years out, that's the place of focus, because that's where you can start extracting value and learnings now.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Sarah, how about you? Advice to brands?
Yeah, I think the first one is that probably most brands have some sort of 3D object of their product or what have you already available. So I would pick up the phone to whoever your product development team is and ask them internally, like, hey, are you currently developing any of our any of the design work or anything for any of our products in game engines? And the likelihood is a lot of them probably are. We've already seen clients who've been creating, say, the dashboards for their cars in Unreal Engine. We've seen some of our CPG brands create cookies in 3D using game engines. So there is probably a lot at people's fingertips that they don't necessarily recognize could be a core component of their future marketing mix. So I'd say, have a little look around internally and just know that those assets can then be used and translated with your different partners in their different ecosystems, whether it is AR, whether it is potentially speaking to a gaming company about an open world experience and giving them these assets and then working together to identify what do we think is the best narrative or additive experience where this potential object or thing could show up. And in some cases, it may not be, but at least it opens the door to a conversation around how you can start applying the different products and identity that you have within these environments. So it may not be as scary as you might think it is.
That is such a great hack to use your 3D rendered products already. Chris, round us out. Advice to brands.
Sure thing. Well, 2 points, and I'll pick up on Sarah's note on creating the digital and virtual versions of your brand and your products, your goods, your services. All of that, there are opportunities to begin now. And as Sarah noted, part of it is looking at what you're already doing in your business, what you're already doing within the pipelines for creation in your business flows, and seeing where 3D is already being utilized and investigating, do we have the opportunity to maximize the value of these assets in other environments, whether it be augmented reality, gaming, et cetera. The other angle on that is to just start. Even if you don't have an existing workflow around 3D, there are opportunities to utilize 3D. And I guarantee you, and I think everyone on this panel would agree, that those opportunities are only going to increase exponentially in the short to midterm. So beginning to build in the muscle to your organization for developing in 3D is a real opportunity. The last note I'd make is, again, on the creator community, tapping into, beginning to understand this new emerging creator community, how to work with it, and how creators are largely going to drive a lot of the experience in the metaverse, and how they can be a part of your brand and the expression of your brand is I think, a real opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Well, thank you all for sitting down with me today. It's been such a great conversation. Jonathan, Sarah, Chris, thank you so much. I run the Experience Centre here at IAB and the AR board and the Games and Esports boards. And, you know, if you're interested in getting involved, these groups are actively talking about how we port the distance between where we are now and where we're going, leaning into new metrics that are forward-looking rather than retroactively fitting. If you're interested in any of that or just learning more, reach out to Zoe at ib.com. And thanks so much for tuning in.